So we're really fortunate today, and thank you so much all for joining us, that the second in our series of workshops on food and our Christian approach to food is on localism. And we're joined by Vicki Hird. Vicki is an expert campaign strategist. She's a consultant and the part-time strategic lead on agriculture at the Royal Society of Wildlife Trusts. She's also a published author and has written a book called Rebugging the Planet, which I haven't yet seen, Vicki, but there we go. Thank you. Maybe you could put a link later on, or I'll publish a link in the chat later on. So Vicki's going to talk to us about the importance and the meaning of localism in food. And the meeting is going to be chaired by Tim Cooper, who's the Emeritus Professor of Sustainability at the University of, I beg your pardon, Emeritus Professor of Sustainable Design and Consumption. Is that correct, Tim? I've got that right?
Yes.
And he is also one of the founding members of Green Christian, which was quite a long time ago. And he's also the chair of our Food Project Working Group. So that makes him my boss in this context. So Tim's going to look after the chairing of the discussion after Vicki's talk. I'm going to hand over to Tim, who's going to give us a little context and talk about the LOAF project, and I'm going to be quiet.
Thanks very much, Kat. Yes, well, I know many of you on this call were also at the previous workshop, so I won't dwell on it too long, but there may well be some newcomers. We've had a fair bit of coverage in the media in recent weeks. So this is one of a series of workshops which we're planning over the coming months. In the first instance, we're going to have 4 workshops, once a month on a Wednesday, first Wednesday of the month. And the aim of these is to revisit the acronym LOAF, Local, Organic, Animal Friendly and Fairly Traded, just to get up to speed with the debate in each of those areas. So we're inviting an expert in each of those areas to present to us the latest thinking, the latest ideas, challenge us with some things that perhaps churches and Christians ought to be doing. And in subsequent months, and indeed over the next couple of years, we'll be adopting a range of other, having a range of different topics and adopting different approaches. So future workshops, there may be more small groups of workshops and things like this. But at the outset, we thought it'd be useful to get some key thinkers in on the areas that have been the core of our work on LOAF over the past few years. And there's no one better than Vicki Hird. Now, when we were talking about speakers, Kat said, "What about Vicki Hird?" I said, "I know Vicki Hird's name. I remember this." Now, in 1995, I began my academic life, and I was teaching economics, home economics, not just economics. My background is economics, but I was teaching home economics, and so I was teaching food students, and we had to look around and find out, well, who are the latest thinkers? Who's the movers and shakers? Who actually do some interesting stuff on sustainable food, for example? And Vicky's name came up. And over the past 25 or 30 years, every now and again, as I read articles about foods and want to brief myself on the latest thinking and the campaigns that are taking place, Vicky is there at the centre. So it's a pleasure to have you with us this evening, Vicky. And I'm going to say no more, but pass over to you. And just to reassure people that Vicky will speak for something between 20 and 30 minutes. And after that, we'll have about 15, 20 minutes for questions and answers at the end. So over to you, Vicky.
Thank you very much, Tim. And that does make me think back to the launch of the Food Mars report, which we were briefly talking about when I met you last week. And that was way back then. And the Food Mars report, it was the first of its kind. And it was, I launched it, commissioned it from a brilliant researcher called Angela, and launched it. It's probably one of the best media launches I've ever had of anything, because it really struck a chord. But it was about the dangers of long distance transport of food. That was the long title, and for various reasons over the years, Food Mars has been misused as a phrase many times. Anyway, I'll touch on that, but I do have a few slides, so I hope that's okay. I will share my screen. So I'm the strategic lead on agriculture at the Royal Society of Wildlife Trusts, and before that, I was head of farming at Sustain, and I've run campaigns at Friends of the Earth, campaign teams at Friends of the Earth. Worked for War on Want as well, where I worked on food, but also on the arms trade and tax dodgers and all sorts of different things. But I have a background as an entomologist. That's where my origins of my work on food and farming came from, because I was investigating better ways to control insect pests. And I loved insects. I love insects. So when I left doing that master's, I didn't want to go into the business of killing insects or even controlling them. So I ended up volunteering at Friends of the Earth. That's a very potted history, but it leads me all the way on to 2 years ago when I was lucky enough to be able to write a book, which is called Rebugging the Planet, which came out, as I said, 2 years ago. And I mention it not because I'm trying to plug a book, but there's a lot in that and in my website about food and farming, because all of the food we eat, almost all of it, apart from obviously the fish, comes from the land. And anything that affects the land affects the invertebrates and the natural systems which they create and which they're very much part of. And my book is all about sharing the space better with the invertebrates. So it talks a lot about what we eat, who we buy from, how we cook, etc. So it is very relevant. So as you'd imagine, because my background is food and farming, there is quite a lot in there about food and farming, but it's also got a lot of other tips about how to look after bugs in your area. But I did want to just touch on why there's a big issue with our food system. And there's no beating about the bush. We do have a broken food system. I'm not the only one saying that. There's many, many experts in the world and academics saying this. And in fact, it was said in the recent National Food Strategy, which the government commissioned and then ignored, from Henry Dimbleby. It's not feeding us well. It's feeding us. It's feeding us. We've got a cornucopia in the supermarkets. It looks like it's working okay, but it's not, because a lot of what's feeding us is making us very ill and killing us. It's not working for farmers and their workers and their animals and the horticulture growers. And overall, it's certainly not working for the planet, for nature, and for climate change, and for the systems on which we absolutely depend, like the water, soil, air, natural biota in the soil, so on and so forth. It's not working well for that. So yeah, we've got big threats ahead on which that broken food system will get more challenged and more problematic. I'm sure you all know about climate change, and we've got a huge amount of imports coming from water stressed countries. We've got a huge pressure on our farmers, which you're probably seeing in the news at the moment, but it's an ongoing thing with flooding. And 2 years ago, it was droughts. We're going to consistently get big challenges to our food production from here and from overseas and globally. Everybody needs to eat, and they're all having that threat. And so we've got to do things differently. We've got to use the land differently. Big threats to nature loss, soil harm to the pollinator species, as well as the wild species on which our ecosystems turn and work. And workers are treated badly. It's one of the lowest paid sectors along the whole food chain. I'm not just talking about farm workers, I'm talking about the whole food chain, because there is too little money going to where it's needed. It's not necessarily that farmers want to treat workers badly or a retailer wants to treat. There's a problem with the whole system. And so business as usual is not an option, either locally, regionally, or nationally. And one thing that we're often told is we need to produce more food. We've got to produce more food, we've got to be more productive, we've got to be more intensive, use chemicals, but using them carefully. We actually produce enough food to feed 11 billion people. We just don't use it properly. A huge amount of it, I'll talk about this later anyway, but a lot of the media, a lot of some of the farming unions say this, that we need to produce more food, we need to feed the world. This is not the problem. We have enough food, we're just not using it properly. That is a critical thing to remember, and that's relevant for the local food system. What we need to do is have an agroecological transition on all farmland. Now, agroecological is not particularly a nice word, but it is different from other words like regenerative or organic, which are often used. I'm really supportive of organic. Regenerative is more complicated, but agroecological, as you can see from this diagram, means many things. Doesn't just mean what happens in the farm. which is really critical, that it's working with nature, for nature, reducing emissions, but working with the system so it's more closed in terms of nutrient cycling. But it's also about fair supply chains, wasting less food, having good food for people to eat, less processed food, and diets, sustainable diets, and allowing people to actually have food as part of their community, which is a lot of which has been lost. So an agroecological transition is much more than just what happens in the farm. It's the whole food system. So that's why it's so critical. There's no question also that we can't do any of this. We can't do anything right in terms of agroecological, getting the farm able to do what it needs to do and manage with the climate threats ahead, like the flooding, unless we change what we eat and what we waste. So meat is a big part of that picture, but many other things are as well. Ultra processed foods and processed foods, a big part of the trend towards monocultures across the globe. Monocultures means producing a single species, a single clone of a crop or a single species of animal, and having to use a lot of chemicals to make sure that species produced in vast fields is protected from pests, which are naturally inclined to go to somewhere where there's a huge amount of food. Anyway, there's many more issues around diets than meat. Meat is a dominant one in the discourse, in the media discourse, and there's a lot of conflict. What we need to do is eating less and better meat, or no meat. That's great too, but having it as part of a healthier diet, which is also less processed, more plants. And we need to be supporting SMEs, small, medium enterprises, and both in the farming and the food system, and creating a lot more horticulture, and ideally on higher ground, because it's threatened on lower ground, because we don't eat enough fruit and veg. It's absolutely clear we can get really, really big benefits for our health by eating more fruit and veg. And if we decentralize it and diversify it across the country, we'll have more available for people in local food systems. At the moment, most of our vegetables come from very small pockets of areas where they've got particularly good soil, it's peatland soil, and that's a problem in itself. But it means that it's all very uniform, huge monocultures of potatoes, leeks, everything. But it has to travel a long way. It's centralized distribution systems, and it's not diverse. It's not providing you with a diverse fruit and veg, and it's not necessarily great for farmers. They've got ever smaller amounts of the food pound, and so we need to make sure that farmers and growers get more of the food pound. These are key issues, on top of all the key issues around nature and climate. But what would local food be trying to solve? A lot of those issues, but it's not just what you and I eat, it's where we buy it. Because retailers hold 92.5% of the food market. They've grabbed more and more of the food market. It's actually got more and more competitive as well. We used to have Tesco just taking over. I ran a campaign once called Tesco Takeover at Friends of the Earth, because it was just buying everything everywhere. But then Aldi and Lidl, and if Amazon is now on the score, so it's a bit more competitive, but it's incredibly concentrated in terms of power. They have huge power when they're buying from the farmers, and that's a big part of the problem. It doesn't allow farmers to get enough of the food pound that you spend in the shop, doesn't reach them. And this illustration I've got on the left of this slide is just one visual that I produced as part of a report I commissioned at Sustain a year ago, which was called Unpicking Food Prices. And I got a professor of accountancy to look in detail at where the money goes in 5 food items, one of which was bread, which you can see here. I did cheddar, burgers, apples, and carrots. And in all cases, farmers got so little of the food pound, not only in terms of the paying for their costs, but also in profits. It's very little profit. And in this bread example, you can see that a lot of the food pound, whereas it was £1.14 loaf, a 100-gram loaf, a lot of the money goes on the costs, the farmer and the baker and the retailer and the transporter. They have a lot of costs. That's a lot of money, and that's there. But the little bit of profit slice at the end, we then break down into where that goes, because the professor of accountancy can look in detail at the accounts and data that I haven't got access to. And you can see that the farmer gets 0.09p. And that was true of all the products. And it's a really big issue, and a lot to do with the extractive supply chains. They extract money from the system, and it's a very complex system as well. There's a lot of processing, a lot of storage, and when it's more processed, you're going to get more of that extraction away from the farmer. So the farmer produces the raw materials and somebody else gets the benefit of adding value. And it's also, fair to say that as we've got, it's 56.8% of the total energy intake that we have is from processed foods. Big part of the problem for our diets, but a big part of the problem for farmers. They've, over the last 30 years, they've got less and less of the food pound. So it's less than 1% to the farmer. Although obviously there's huge different systems where there's a lot more going to the farmer, but this was from a macro shot from this professor, and it's really illustrative. And we also waste 30% of the food, which isn't a good part of the system. And if we eat more local, we're more likely to actually value what we buy. If we buy it direct from the farmer or through a better food trader, we're going to value it more and waste it less. A huge amount of the food waste is actually bread, which is, tragic. Quickly moving on to what we can do. So I've got actions here for individuals and communities, and then what we need to do politically. But obviously, one of the critical things that you need to do is act as a citizen, and vote locally and nationally for the kind of policies which I will talk about, and support those organisations lobbying for them. Vote for those. Obviously, eating and buying with nature in mind, buying direct from local farmers or from accredited farmers like organic, pasture for life, leaf farmers. I'm trying to think of all the accreditations, but those are really good ones, especially organic and pasture for life. And the farmers tend to get more of the food pound, although organic in the supermarkets can be as bad as all the other produce. Farmers don't get a huge premium. They get a premium, but not a huge premium. If you can buy organic from a local farmers market or a local shop, or direct from things like Riverford, who do great work, really supporting all their farmers selling into their veggie box schemes. And if you're buying less processed, as I said before, there's less extraction in the supply chain and you're getting a healthier product. More of the money is going to the farmer. As I said before, less and better meat. Meat is a huge part of the problem in terms of greenhouse gases. It's the 10% of the UK's greenhouse gases comes from agriculture, and a large proportion of that is the methane and nitrous oxides and carbon dioxide related to meat production. And it's even more if you take account of the meat and feeds that we import to feed our meat. And one of the things about better meat, it's a real, what is better meat? It's a really big issue for people, quite rightly. And I formed about 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, an organisation called Eating Better, which is all about promoting the idea of less and better meat, supporting good meat farmers, and saying what that actually means, what that should look like, and what policies are. So you could look at that to look at what better meat you could be eating. And obviously, if you don't know, not eating meat is fine, obviously fine, and really welcome. But there are some fabulous farmers I know who are producing, particularly beef and sheep, in really fantastic systems where they've got far fewer animals, really well looked after, living longer. They have their health and welfare protected in that system, and it's really rich for nature. It's providing a closed system of nutrient for the soil and for the grassland, and also linked in with the crops as well. So, but eating much less and better. And I've done many reports over the years showing just how much less it should be, and particularly no intensive chicken and pigs. And that's what we've invested in over the last 30 years, is massively into really intensive pig and chicken systems, which are morally absolutely appalling and cruel for the animals, and I think too for the workers. There's an inhumanity built into those systems, and the processing of them, which we really got to address. And also supporting farmers and growers. So if what you eat, what you buy, and spreading the word. In my book, I talk about 3 things you can do. It's what you do in your garden, what you buy, and what you do as a citizen. And it's absolutely critical that we spread the word, and I'm sure you do a lot of that. And I've put a note there actually in the slide about Better Food Traders. I should have mentioned them earlier, and I've got the link in there. Better Food Traders was started a few years ago by my organisation and a few other organisations to provide a platform for traders who actually do things fairly. Because most farmers don't want to sell direct. They can't. They're not into marketing. They don't want to go to the farmers market, but they want to find somebody who will. So Better Food Traders is a platform for those. And there was a handful when we started. Now I think it's about 150. And it ranges from veggie box schemes to shops, wonderful series of shops called Locavore up in Scotland. And you can have a look on the website and find out a local better food trader near you. We obviously need many more. They're a tiny percentage of the market share. And my goal ultimately is that they have a much larger market share, because they give the farmer the right kind of money, and also have a more responsive attitude to what the farmer is growing. You can't have perfect looking carrots if you want to do things which is good for nature. You have to check, you have to go work with the seasons, work with the land, work with nature, and they are very responsive to that. So it's responsive to the farmer, as well as giving a fair deal to the farmer and a fair deal to the consumer. But the more we have of these, the more available it will be to people. So spreading the word is crucial about that, and getting them supported. Even if you can't buy everything from them, just buying something will make all the difference. And so going on to what you can do as a community and with your faith and your faith groups, again, goes without saying, spreading the word. And as you know, making sure people understand how food can deliver for climate and nature emergency if you do it differently. If you're buying locally, if you're looking your farmer or your better food trader in the face and actually choosing fresh produce and sustainably reared or grown produce. We can't do any of the climate and nature emergencies. We can't tackle any of them without changing food and farming. So we're all part of that change. So doing it together will make a bigger difference. And I've put a link there to the idea of running films. My local Hackney sustainability group does film showings every couple of months, and there's a good one out now which I happen to be in, but it's following 3 brilliant young farmers on their journey during 2001, 2002, on their journey to get into farming. And it's really interesting. It's one horticulture grower, one beef farmer, and one wheat crop farmer. And it's really interesting to watch. It's a good story, but it also is really, it provokes a lot of discussion. So if you can do film showings in your local cinema, and it's been shown in all the Picture House cinemas, and it's been shown anyway. You can look at the website 6 Inches of Soil, and there's a new book out to go with it. But having film shows or debates locally and have farmers come in to talk about what they're doing is a way of raising awareness, both in farmers' minds about what customers and eaters want, but also eaters and customers listening to farmers and getting more understanding. Because what we've got now between most of us and the farmer is a vast industry blocking any communication. It's the supermarkets selling you what they want to sell you because it's good for them, but it's not good for the farmer, and most of it's very processed. So having no conversations locally is really important. And there are ways to grow together. I've been involved over the many years in many things, and I'm going to talk about one of them in a bit, but about having community growing sites. And I've listed a few of the initiatives there: Good to Grow, Coronation Gardens, Incredible Edibles. All these help you with the tools you need to start doing a little bit of scrubby ground growing, or a whole plot, or allotments, all sorts. There's obviously the allotments society as well, but there's much more that can be done. And there's co-ops buying together. If you buy, for instance, from Suma, which sell a lot of the kind of dry goods that you need organically and fairly traded, buying together. I've got a friend who buys with us lots of produce, so you can get it much more affordably if you're buying it in bulk, and it gives the farmers a regular set. And it's a moral duty to reverse the hidden food imperialism in our system, how we're taking a load of land and water from the world without giving back, and without giving the workers and the land the protection it needs and the wages it needs. Food Mars talked a bit about that. It's incredible, the land we take overseas for our supermarkets to sell us green beans perfectly chopped at either end. It has a huge impact on those countries, particularly in the global south, and it has huge impact on the environment. Like soya, to grow soya for feeding our animals intensively so we can eat cheap chicken, has a massive social impact in South America, and also causes destruction of the tropical rainforests and the wetlands, many parts of the world. Palm oil as well, huge problem. So understanding that and talking about it and looking up information about it is really important. And I think I said, final thing, our faith should be about growing more of what we can grow according to what our resources are. So it's just a few thoughts. And the important thing is that oh, this is one of the examples I was going to quickly talk about of one of those growing your own. The organisation I work for now, Wildlife Trust, has joined with several other organisations, including Incredible Edibles and Garden Organic, to start helping people to grow their own food. They launched it when the King was crowned, hence it's called My Coronation Garden. And I think there's 3,500 logged on now, but it provides everything you need to start doing a local nature-filled food growing initiative in your area. And there's loads of tips, brilliant tips and advice and ideas and what you can do to encourage particular types of I'm sorry if anybody's arachnophobe. I forget that. I adore all the bugs, and I forget that people find spiders. That I should have put the ladybird picture I've got in there. But there's loads of tips about how to actually encourage nature onto your growing site, but actually grow food. And the wonderful thing about growing your own food, and wonderful thing about growing it with people, is that you build communities and understanding and diversity within the community. But it's also most of the food is flowering, so you're doing something for the pollinators and the invertebrates that need flowering plants. But by doing diverse growing, you're creating a fantastically wonderful site for nature anyway. So there's loads of, but there's many other initiatives like that. I just thought I'd mention that one, Coronation Gardens, which you can get a lot of free source from. But the critical thing is to act as a citizen. And this is the area that I work in a lot, which is about lobbying for the right kind of policies so that a lot of that can happen. And you can join organizations like the Wildlife Trust in your area, like Friends of the Earth do a lot of work on this, RSPB, National Trust, all the organizations. We're calling for the right kind of policies that would deliver local food for local people, sustainably produced and supported. And obviously one of the key areas is to get the farm support, the payments based on public goods, so that farmers are paid to deliver things like good nature, protected water, healthy soils, and restoring nature as well, but also growing trees. One of the wonderful things that the government is now going to pay for is agroforestry, which I think is a wonderful area. And I could talk about that a bit more if anybody wants to know about it. So you could put trees within a farm system, cereals, as well as livestock. And there's going to be new payments announced in June this year to do that. But there's loads of other initiatives that we've really lobbied hard and got the government to agree to do. So paying farmers for the public goods. And also what we don't think there's enough of is advice and demonstration, all underpinned with the right kind of regulations so that we're making sure that the worst excesses don't happen. But of course, one of the reasons why a lot of farmers are causing, for instance, a lot of water pollution is because they have to produce in such a way that they can't necessarily contain all the nutrients they're producing, because they have to produce so much milk, for instance, because they get so little payment per litre. This is one of the underlying themes of what I've done over the years, is say we've got to be paying farmers the right kind of reward for what they're producing so they can produce in ways that don't pollute the environment and which to encourage nature. So that's critical, and that can come from public support, but also market support, and regulations underpinning all that. And we need a just transition. I've just written a blog on a just transition, actually, for the Wildlife Trust. It's on their website. I think it's really important that the people that are going to be affected by this are actually consulted and involved in the new era of farm support, but also wider, beyond the farm gate, the farm workers, all the people that are making the sausage rolls, are packing the soup, the sandwiches, that are standing behind the counter in Tesco and serving you. All these people are part of a system which is changing rapidly, and they've got to be part of that conversation and be supported in the transition. And yeah, so those key areas for farm support. But as I've mentioned, one of the other things we've been campaigning for is better markets and infrastructure so that we actually can support local food systems, so you can buy local food more easily, so everybody can buy local food. Because at the moment it's very difficult to actually, for a farmer to sell locally, because a lot of them are producing what we call commodities. They're producing products that need to be processed a bit, for instance, grains into flour, or part processing of broccoli, or processing of meat products, dairy, etc. All that requires infrastructure, and it's become more and more centralized over the years and controlled by big players. And what we need is for some investment and support and planning support to allow more infrastructure to happen locally. I did a big survey of 500 farmers a few years ago, and one of the things a lot of them wanted, it was a survey about what they wanted post farm gate. They wanted better prices, obviously, but they also wanted alternative routes to market, local food systems or regional food supplies. But one of the things they said, they wanted hubs so they could sell some of their food to a local hub, or work through a local hub with other farmers to sell locally. So that would give us shorter and fairer supply chains, but it does require investment, and it requires good planning by local authorities to allow that to happen, making sure that hubs are available. For instance, cheaper rents and things like that. There's a lot that needs to happen that is outlined in a lot of the reports I've done, but you can lobby your local authorities to support better markets and better initiatives like that through. And there's something called the Sustainable Food Places Network, where there's many sustainable food partnerships across the country, and that's what they're lobbying for at a local level, and many others at a local level as well. And obviously we want fair trading, transparency, regulations and enforcement, so all farmers are treated fairly by their buyers. And this has been, again, a campaign I've run for many years, so that we have regulations of the supply chain so that they can't be abusive to the person they're buying from. And there's something called the Groceries Code Adjudicator, which enforces a code of practice. So we've got some level of protection, but we need a lot more. So we're lobbying for a fair dealing regulation for every sector, like dairy, like horticulture, like cereals, beef, chicken. So you've got a regulation to make sure that the growers are not being abused by the buyers along the whole chain, because it's different parts of the chain are abusive. I could go into that in more detail if you want, but we haven't got time. The other thing is tackling food waste. There's been a big campaign to get mandatory food waste targets, and the food waste, and even some of the food industry saying, yeah, we need this mandatory. We've got to report on food waste that we're responsible for and reduce it. And the government about 2 months ago decided not to do it. It's maddening. Food waste is about 30% of the food that we produce is wasted. It's a ridiculous waste of the land, the chemicals, the energy, the work. It's absolutely insane, and it happens all along the chain. A lot of people say, "Oh, it's the consumer and the domestic people," and a lot does happen in a domestic setting. I think partly because food is too cheap and people throw it away, and it's not particularly great food anyway. We need to reevaluate our relationship with food and not throw it away. But also, there's a lot of waste related to the supermarket specifications, like the perfectly white cauliflower, the perfect drip fat in the meat, the perfect looking carrot. All these things create waste, and we know that. There's evidence to say that, and it includes in the global south, where they're producing green beans for us, and if it's not exactly the right size and cut in exactly the right way, it's wasted. And then there's bioenergy crops, which are funded through subsidies. These are crops like maize and sugar beet and other crops which are produced to put into cars and factories. And we don't think that's a good use of crop land. It should be used either for food or for nature or for other purposes. We've got 120,000 hectares currently under bioenergy crops, and that is not a good use of our land. And the government needs to promote more nature-friendly diets, which I've already talked about, through what they procure in schools, hospitals, care homes, the armed forces. And they need to give people incentives to be buying better food. Like we campaigned for many years for a sugary drinks tax, which we actually got. It's a sugary drinks levy. And it has made a difference. There is less sugar in sugary drinks and less sugary drinks. But there's so much more that needs to be done through fiscal measures like that, taxing the bad, supporting the goods. And as I've mentioned many times, action to ensure much less processed food is marketed and advertised. Because one of the reasons we're eating so much is it's brilliantly marketed. It's brilliant marketed. It's put on the shelves. We think it's okay. And we think we're too busy to cook our own food because the adverts tell us so. And it's incredibly smart advertising that we've got to withstand. So, but it's very hard to withstand it. So we've been campaigning for many years to get a curb on advertising of junk food and highly processed food, particularly to children, but it matters for everybody. So that's the last of my slide. I just say thank you. And we have an action on bees, which I just felt I should put in, because our bees are threatened in certain parts of the country by the continued use of a particular pesticide called, or it's a neonicotinoid pesticide, which is used in sugar beet, and it's actually banned for use here and across the whole of Europe, completely banned, but our government keeps using a derogation to allow its continued use. So we're asking for action on that. It's a complicated story. I can talk about that if anybody wants to know more. But support your wildlife trust in your local area, because they're all individual charities across the country. And also my Rebugging the Planet website has lots of tips and ideas and blogs. If you don't want, obviously don't have to buy the book, you can go on the website and look at all I've put there, including how to talk to children about nature, and particularly doing bug hunts and bug related activities, but also about food. I'll leave it there. I hope I haven't gone over time. I probably haven't I? Apologies.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much indeed, Vicky.
I'll stop shouting.
That was absolutely fascinating. And so we do have about a quarter of an hour now for comments and questions. And in this time, can I make a plea? We're going to be having workshops over the coming months, and this one in particular is focusing on local food. So Vicky has raised a whole range of different
I'm sorry.
issues. No, that's fine. Which are mostly, many of which are interconnected, and we all know that this is a food system that we're dealing with here. But if certainly in the early few questions, I like to encourage people to think about the geography of our food, where it's grown, and the proximity of us as the consumers of food with the farmer and where the food is produced. And while people are thinking up those questions, let me have the chair's privilege of asking the first one. And I asked this having mentioned that I taught food students for a while, but actually when I was an undergraduate, my undergraduate dissertation was on whether or not Britain should be more self-sufficient in food production. And one of the reasons for that was that it was quite a topical issue in the 1970s, because the government had produced a report 1975 called Food from Our Own Resources, and various publications came out which I used in my my dissertation. The issue was reappearing on the agenda with our our previous Prime Minister, Liz Truss, would you believe, actually mentioned the need for us to be more self-sufficient just before she was unceremoniously booted out of office. My question for you, Vicky, is this then. What could be done? You'll know the figures probably better than I do. I know that the peak was in 1984 or 86 of self-sufficiency, and the best, I think we got up to about 80%. A bit out of date there, but it's been going down sort of since then. What do you think about self-sufficiency? And in particular, I'm trying to get my head around place, because it's quite easy to try and appeal to national identity and say, well, let's buy British. On the other hand, some people would say, well, actually, it's nearer to the north of France, because I live in the south of England, if I did, than the north of Scotland. So in terms of mileage for people living in Folkestone, it's better to get the stuff from Calais than from the north of Scotland. So how do we wrestle with this issue of space? And should we link to that? You mentioned these beans grown overseas. Sure, is a matter of principle, not buy, because I've heard other people say, well, no, we're helping support the incomes of the people over there. It's usually the argument that we supply these poor Africans with an income by paying for their green beans. So how do you respond to that particular?
Yeah, it's all these issues are actually very live right now, partly because of the huge loss of crops as a result of the flooding, which is a result of climate change, which the food system is partly responsible for, obviously not wholly. So it's very live at the moment. We're about 60% self-sufficient in food, but in terms of particular items like fruit, we're, I think, 17% self-sufficient. We could be a lot more. We've lost a huge amount of, for instance, our apples and pears orchards, and many other crops as well, like berries and other fruit crops that we could grow. Obviously, we're never going to be self-sufficient in fruit. We're always going to want the citrus and the bananas, etc. But we could be a lot more self-sufficient. That's what I was talking about having a more decentralized horticulture set up, because at the moment you can only buy your most of your fruit and veg from a supermarket, and it's come a long way. And even if you're buying it from a local grocer, it's probably coming a long way. And most of the apples come from elsewhere, New Zealand, a lot of them. So, I mean, there isn't a simple answer to your question, but in terms of should we be self-sufficient, I don't think we should. I think one of the reasons certain parts of the food community ask to be more self-sufficient is it's a sort of desperate plea for support. Like the National Farmers Union saying we should be self-sufficient, so we should be supporting our farmers for being more productive, feeding the world, more intensive farming systems. Whereas, as I made very clear, we actually globally produce what we need to eat. We just don't use it well. We feed it to animals, we feed it to cars, we waste it. And we create environments across the globe where people can't afford to eat good food. So they're eating very basic, poor foods. So there's a lot in there to do with making sure people and countries have decent incomes, which is about, you know, cutting the debt and all that kind of stuff. I've gone way off topic there, but I mean, in a sense, it's about having the right food system that fits the carrying capacity of our land, of our soils, of our climate, and of our capacity to actually produce. And one of the keys to that is having more diversity. So there isn't a single answer for a single sector like fruit or veg or anything, but we could do a lot more. We could be a lot more. And ultimately, I think, say in 10 years' time, when climate change is kicking in even greater, we'll realize that we've all got to be growing food as well in our gardens as much as we can. It's going to get quite serious. And a huge amount of our imports are coming from places with really big water stress. So they won't be able to produce food for us. And why should they? They should be producing food for themselves in ways that retain soil capacity, etc. So we need to be really smart. And in fact, that's what Henry Dimbleby said in his report. He didn't say enough about local food, I have to say, and local food systems. I was quite cross about that, but the rest of the report was pretty good. And he talked about how much land we use overseas and why we should be investing in more diverse and sustainable production here. And that means less land going over to feeding pigs and poultry and using that land for nature-friendly farming.
Thank you very much.
In case you can't see all of the hands up, Tim.
I can. I've got a list.
Just in case you can't see all.
Yep. James was the first I saw.
I think Angie was in first, then James, then Barbara.
Over. Yeah.
Angie.
It was just an observation, really. We are lucky enough to be able to get Riverford vegetables where we are, veggie box, but that is quite pricey. Now that is probably the price that we have to pay, and I'll get that. But we live in a very deprived area and a school. And a lot of, I think 43% of our kids are on pupil premium and free meals. And it's just, at the moment, if you've got 3 kids to feed, you're going to feed them what you can afford.
Yeah,
and that
totally understand that.
Something really needs to be done to support families from the start, really, because what comes with poverty, mental health problems, debt, financial worries, all you're thinking about is putting food on the table. And sometimes that's going to be nuggets and chips.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. And that's a lot to do with incomes and the welfare state and adequately linking it to the price of food and good food, the price of good food. I totally agree. It's not so much to do with the farming system, but I totally agree. And it's absolutely appalling the way food banks have had to grow and grow in number and size and capacity. And that we had very few food banks 10 years ago. 15 years ago, I think, and now there's thousands feeding millions. It's totally unacceptable. Yeah.
It's almost, local food is almost out of the reach of people where I live in Sandwell. And it's that support as well to teach people to cook, because we've been fed this lie so much by Tesco and Sainsbury's that you need to nip in, get a pizza and you put it in the oven, and it's rubbish. It's not
They're not good calories. It's not good calories. It's a lot of grain and not a lot of variety in fruit and veg. I know. I think that's one of the most insidious things. If I say it's the least easy to campaign on. You know, I've been campaigning with people for years to get the marketing of junk food curbed, and it's hard. But actually, again, Henry Dimbleby got that. He think we were on a junk food cycle. But you're right. I mean, if you're very low income, you've got to feed your family. You want to feed them something you know won't go off. you'll buy things that won't go off, unlike apples or berries. It's really difficult. That's a lot to do with making sure we've got the right economy that makes sure people have decent incomes and they don't have to work 3 jobs to feed their, so on and so forth. Yeah. A lot there. Mind you, a lot of people in the food system are actually very low wages as well. So it's,
it's having that, it's having like community orchards and
yes, and a lot of veg box schemes have got systems whereby people can pay more so other people can pay less. There's ways that they're doing that, and there's an initiative at Sustain called Bridging the Gap, which is about looking at where you need to put the money or the resources to bridge the gap between what agroecological farmers need and what people on low incomes at all price points can afford. So that Bridging the Gap project is lottery funded, and it should be coming up with some good ideas soon, which hopefully will be rolled out by another government.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to James. If James is still waiting,
yes,
he's got off. Yeah.
Thinking about local retail and wholesale, the alternatives around where I live in Rochdale, and probably the whole of the town of Rochdale, and certainly was true of Oldham as well, is that all the alternatives to the supermarkets are Asian-run, Asian-owned shops, and I imagine the wholesale trade as well. I wonder how that sort of sector can be brought in to this sort of discussion.
Yeah,
because I think they probably could if the right noises were made, the right contacts made.
Yeah, same here actually where I live. There's a lot of Asian
shops. I used to live in
yeah.
Sandwell actually, so I know something about that as well.
It's a good question. I was working with the Association of Convenience Stores about getting fresh produce and agroecological produce into the stores, but it is quite hard for them because they are mostly going to wholesalers for the bulk of their produce. And what's ironic now is that Tesco now owns Booker's, which is one of the biggest wholesalers, and so now these small shops are crying out because Tesco it's causing the price to go up for them, and Tesco's getting it's not good. The power. I mean, one of the things I think we've got to address, and I know we want to talk about different things, but it's about power and money. Unfortunately, I've written blogs about this, because I've looked at it for 35 years, and until we get the power balance better, it's really hard. And so those small stores should have the power to be able to do decent sales of fresh produce, more fresh produce, less processed. It's very hard for them because they're small businesses, and the wholesale sector has actually declined quite a lot over the last years. But I did hear about a great one called Organic North. Organic North is a wholesaler for the organic sector in the north, and it's going great guns. It was on the food programme a while ago. Really, really interesting initiative and doing lots of different things. So people are starting to take a bit more power back, and that's exciting. But we need more of it, and we need people to support them. I wonder if
cooperatives, in terms of this sort of sector, what we might call a sector of the retail market, whether somehow cooperatives could be encouraged, whereby they can sort of work into the market, including, see, around here we don't have anything like wholesale whole food shops. Apart from if I want to buy dry beans, I go to the supermarket or I go to an Asian run shop.
If they could.
And when it comes to rice, you can't get brown rice in an Asian run shop. You have to go to supermarkets, so one's sort of a bit trapped in many ways. I don't want to start moaning.
I wonder if Suma sell brown rice. I imagine they do. But they do. So you could get it from Suma. Maybe create a consumer co-op in your area.
We don't have one around here.
Sorry?
I said we don't have one of those around here.
No, Suma is a national retailer, and it sends you boxes of what you want in sustainably packaged, and mostly organic. And so you could buy organic rice from Suma, but it's better for you and probably for them to be doing it in bulk. So if you could group up with several friends and do a group purchase for Suma. I'm not paid by them enough to say there other retailers are probably available, but I just know my friends do that and it really works for them. and it's a company which has values that we'd support, but there are others.
I will investigate that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Over to Barbara now.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Vicky. You very comprehensively described the complexities of local. It's really, really difficult. And that's I think it's the L of the LOAF principle that we've had most challenge on over the years for obvious reasons. But what you said about with the changing world we're in with climate change and how we're going to have more challenges of growing food and how we're all going to have to grow more of our own food made me wonder if this might be one of our good ways of campaigning on the local aspect. That is, growing your own food in your own garden, obviously, if you've got a garden. But, you know, there's rooftop gardens, there's growing food on outbuildings. There's a lot of tree planting going on at the moment, even in urban areas. I have yet to see fruit trees being planted.
Yes.
Why not? With a welcome invitation to the community to help themselves when they're ripe. Years ago, my husband gave a talk at rugby school, and he suggested that they planted fruit trees all around their rugby playing fields. I don't think they've taken them up on it, but maybe now's the time we should start suggesting things like that.
There's a wonderful organisation called the Orchard Project, which works to get community orchards everywhere. And I'm totally with you on this. I think we just need more trees, more fruit and nut trees. In fact, Riverford have planted a lot of nut trees to try and replace some of the nuts that are coming in globally, because everybody loves nuts now, but we're importing them all. But I totally agree. And one of the wonderful things I mentioned is the agroforestry initiative, which we campaigned very hard for, and the government are rolling out a new support scheme for agroforestry, which means farmers will be able to grow trees in rows and in different ways in the farm system with livestock and with crops. And so that's really exciting. And I know some really good agroecological agroforestry farmers. There's some that have been doing it for the last 10, 15 years. So the trees are bearing fruit, because one of the problems with trees is it takes a long time. So you have to start and have belief that God will deliver and you'll get the fruit and the nuts. But it's really, really wonderful. Yeah.
Talking rootstocks, you'll get the fruit in a couple of years.
Yeah, this is true. And the other thing you get is lots of biodiversity if you're not spraying them a lot. So, you know, some of the Orchard Project orchards have got some very rare beetles, for instance. Really exciting to share that with the community and show what there is there. And having an orchard within a city, I've got a little orchard just down the road in very built up Hackney, and it's wonderful. Throughout the seasons, you can see it changing in the invertebrates. And I've found my first clearwing moth there. I've never seen a clearwing moth in my life, and it's just down my road. It was so wonderful. But yeah, there's so many ways in which a community garden, community orchards, community growing has real benefits, but we need it to scale out a lot more in parks and green spaces.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Catherine in a moment. Just to remind people, the chat is active, so please do make use of the chat. There are some questions there. I'm going to get to one or two of them, but I'm not sure we'll have time for everything. But Catherine, you've been very patient, so over to you.
Fascinating talk and discussion, Vicky. Thank you. And you mentioned at one point seasonal choices, and I think for those of us that connect even just a tiny bit with growing locally, we already, it's implicit that we think seasonally. But for those people who haven't had the chance to grow locally and aren't aware of what produce is in season, do you know of any resources or guides that could just give them? The reason I ask this is I think that if people are already looking for seasonal produce, then they won't be tempted by the adverts, and they won't be tempted by the food that's gone food miles, because they'll know they're looking for seasonal. And obviously all the advantages are they're grown locally, they're fresher, they're cheaper. Etc. So we perhaps could do with some guides for people who haven't got that knowledge.
Yeah, there are a lot actually. They came in thick and fast after the Food Miles report, and it's really brilliant to see. I'm trying to think of one. I mean, Garden Organic will have them, and lots of organisations have produced them. On the top of my head, I can't remember the latest one I've seen, but they are available, and they will vary across the country. You know, in Scotland, you've got amazingly different produce, although you could have a lot more berries in Scotland than they do. They've lost a lot of their berry productivity, which really should come back. But yeah, that is a really good way as well of introducing variety into what people eat and different tastes. I mean, I find that what's happened to our apples is tragic. With 5 main varieties fill our shelves. And I ran a campaign once and asked people to go into their supermarket and log how many local varieties there were in the absolute peak of British in organic British apple season. And we did a big campaign, and it got a lot of attention. I did the same things with strawberries. Unfortunately, it hasn't had the impact that that it should have had. Although we've got a lot more community orchards now, which is good. But what it did do with strawberries, which was actually massively the industry invested in polytunnels and extending the growing season. So now you get strawberries here much more, more months than was available before, which it's a good thing, but it is to the detriment of other berries. And if you don't like polytunnels, there's issues there. But understanding seasonality will, I think will come back as we start to realize our food system is very, very vulnerable. It needs to be much more resilient. And part of that resilience is variety and diversity. And so seasonality will come into that, and stop expecting cherry tomatoes in December, those kind of things. It's but we have invested in one system, so we have to disinvest. Sorry.
Absolutely, sorry. Discover what you can get in December, and the greens, the chard, the broccoli, and the kale.
Yeah. I mean, we do have capacity to freeze things and can things, and canned isn't absolutely as good as fresh, but canned is good. Canned is great if it's it's really good for you. If you haven't got a freezer, or you can't pay the electricity for freezer, canned goods is a good thing. But freezing things is also a good thing. Can really be an option for getting those things that are in season and then freezing them, cooking them, blanching them, whatever, and putting them in the freezer ready for when you want them in the colder months. Yeah. So it's a learning thing. So I think one of the problems with farming, as well as eaters like us, it's a lot of the knowledge has gone, and building that knowledge back into the farmers, so they don't just go for the chemical. They understand the potential pest predators that could help them, and the seasonality, and how to have longer rotations in the farming system, so they can cope with pests and diseases. Is the same as us understanding what's seasonal and what's healthy.
And a program that you just mentioned, the food program, does that.
Oh, yes.
A lot of episodes covers that.
Yeah. But there are a lot of organisations that produce seasonality calendars. I can share them afterwards if that's useful, Tim.
Yeah, great.
Thank you for that. We are actually planning to over the coming months increase the number of pages on food on our website. So all the resources that are being offered in this session and elsewhere, we hope to utilise and communicate to encourage people to find out the many different initiatives there are. One of which is Oddbox. And there's a question in the chat about something called Oddbox. Now, my daughter did a WhatsApp to me the other day and showed me the size of one of the potatoes, which is slightly larger than the normal sized pumpkin that she got with this Oddbox. And obviously, the supermarket had decided that was too big a potato to sell, even as a baking potato.
You wouldn't believe the rejections. The rejections is horrendous.
Well, the question that was raised was this, that it's nice and cool and trendy, and I'm talking about my 30-something daughter, who actually sent me this, because she has had Oddbox for a year or two now. She lives in London. But the question that was raised is, are these just token gestures? They bring their own contradictions within them because they're not necessarily organic. The Oddbox scheme allows imports in. Are they just a way of supermarkets appearing to be better than they really are?
It's a very fair question. It's interesting because the scheme that I'm connected with in Hackney, the woman who started it 25 years ago, it's called Growing Communities, and she's grown with the scheme in terms of understanding of what you need to do. She started doing a cooperative organic veggie box, and it's grown and grown. It's now got a farmer's market. She's grown to cover the whole of London, but in that she's always stayed close to the values of organic, always all organic, and fair trade if it's imported. And so she's importing kiwi fruit and citrus and other products that we can't grow here. But she's set up this idea of the food zones. And if you look up food zones, you'll probably reach her sort of blog about it and her report. And it's the idea that you should be getting things to as close as possible that you can to where you for certain products like perishable goods, and then you go a bit further out for the less perishable, and then further out again, and there's a logic to all those steps. And that's how she runs the veggie box scheme. But all the way, it's paying the farmers a decent return, and it's always organic. So you're getting those pluses with things like Oddbox using the surplus or rejected produce. I do think there is a bit of a problem. It's like food banks. We have to have food banks, other people will starve, but they are actually propping up a failed system, a broken system. And the more that we allow that system to continue and extract money and huge profits at the expense of the environment and nature and our health, the longer we're going to have this problem. And the things like Oddbox and surplus fruit and veg schemes to food banks, they've become quite commoditized as well. I know people who say farmers are just growing for the food bank now. And that, maybe that's an answer, that you're actually, there's a closer relationship and it's actually working, and that might be the right way. But we've got to do that carefully, because it could be embedding other problems within it if the farmer's not getting enough consumers. Anyway, that's a complex picture to talk about, but we shouldn't be wasting any food. So if there is food that is rejected, it should be eaten. It certainly shouldn't be thrown away. It could be made into vinegar and other things, but we should certainly be ideally eating it. And there is a whole food waste hierarchy which exists, which have been well established by organizations like Feedback, which do a lot of work in the area of food waste. It's worth looking at the website, actually. The waste hierarchy is, absolutely it should be eaten by humans, and then it goes down the hierarchy, and feeding it to animals is another option. Pigs were actually bred to be the waste disposal machines in a community, in a household. They've become something so horrendous and other, but those kind of things, where you are going to produce, cuttings, peelings, feeding them to the animals is fine. Anyway, that's a whole other picture. But Oddbox is doing a job that we need right now, as are the food banks. But they're not necessarily the answer in the whole. We should be actually accepting perfectly good produce like a large potato as a norm, not as an outlier and a weird.
And I mentioned Oddbox, but I mentioned supermarkets. Of course, supermarkets often have things called wonky vegetables, which they price a little bit other things, which are better than nothing. But they highlight they're good for one thing. It's at least educating people about the possibility.
But the industry, the industry say that those wonky veg schemes are just another marketing line that they've got to fit, and they don't get well paid for them. So it's not the answer and that's coming from the horse's mouth. The head of the British Apples and Pears has said this is not the answer. It's just another marketing line they've got to, and they've got calipers to show the absolute size of apples that they've got, and they have to throw away the rest. It's just it's not a good system that's led us down this path. You're right, it's educating people, but I'm not sure how much, if I'm honest. But I suppose it's better than nothing.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our time. It's 10 past 8. Thank you very much indeed, Vicky, for your excellent answers to that range of.
Sorry, I was going a bit too far from the local food thing. I can never separate these things out.
That's fine. It does reflect the fact that it is a very complex area. And I was going to throw in a question: do I buy local or do I buy organic? But these questions are unanswerable. At the end of the day, as you suggested at the end, people have to make up their own particular priorities and home in on one thing and focus on that.
And join campaigns. Lobbying.
But I'm going to now pass back to Kat.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks, Vicky. That was absolutely inspiring to hear. And the thing that I'm most grateful about, I think, Vicky, is that while you obviously have a huge grasp of the complexity of it all and how everything's interrelated, you also gave us some really practical small steps that for those of us that find this baffling or overwhelming
it is,
can start with. So thank you so much. That's really important, because once you've taken one step, the others become so much easier and you become a warrior. So before we move to closing and farewell, I'd like to just mention what our next talk will be about. That's going to be on the 5th of June. And our subject then, Tim mentioned that we're trying to do these in order of LOAF, our acronym: local, organic, animal friendly, fair trade. Unfortunately, the order in which we've got our speakers means we have to be LOAF because our next speaker will actually be talking about animal friendly, welfare friendly food systems. And we are lucky to have secured Joyce D'Souza, who's the former CEO and still a member of Compassion in World Farming. And Joyce has also written a book called Animal Welfare in World Religion, which I'll put a link to in the chat. So please, if you're able, join us for that. And again, Vicky, thank you so much for giving us so much food for thought. For those
Thanks
of you,
for asking me.
Oh, absolute pleasure. And for those of you that found there was so much to get to grips with, just to let you know, this will be on our YouTube channel and on our webpage as soon as we can quickly top and tail and edit it. So what I'd like to do, if I may, is just close in prayer. I think one of the things that you've highlighted for us today, Vicky, is the pressure that our broken systems put on local producers, and how important it is that we find ways to fix that. So if you would like to, if it's your thing, please join me in prayer. Father, we thank you for the farmers and their families and the people who locally process the food, make it and get it to us. We are so blessed to have men and women willing to put in the time and toil it takes to produce crops and livestock and turn them into nourishing food for us. So thank you for blessing their efforts to produce healthy foods that provide for a family's nourishment and enjoyment and keep them safe from sometimes aggressive livestock, terrible weather conditions that damage harvests, and the vagaries of this broken system. And it may be childish of me, but I want to end this prayer with a reminder of E. Russell Adams' wonderful Child's Grace. Thank you for the world so sweet. Thank you for the food we eat. Thank you for the birds that sing. Thank you, God, for everything. Amen. And thank you all for having been here tonight. You've been a terrific, engaged chat group in chatting to us and asking questions and being here. And we will be, as well as posting the YouTube, we'll be putting all your great recommendations and suggestions. We'll collect those from the chat and put them together so that people can find them.